Imagine for a moment the thrill that courses through your veins as you sit securely strapped into a towering amusement park ride. The anticipation builds with every inch the ride climbs, the world sprawling beneath you. The mixture of excitement and nervous energy bubbling inside. Now imagine that exhilarating ascent morphing into a nightmare, the kind that 8th grader Kaitlyn Lassiter endured in 2007 at Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom in Louisville. At the conclusion of this gripping true event story, we will explore lawsuits, determine who was at fault, and of course, read your opinions in the comment section. You will also see footage of Kaitlyn at a news conference. Kaitlyn's day at the park, intended to be filled with laughter and joy, took a devastating turn at the Superman Tower of Power. She and her two friends, having thoroughly enjoyed their first ride, decided to experience it again due to the short queue. In a last-minute decision, Kaitlyn swapped places with one of her friends, moving from the middle to the end seat. The ride started as innocently as before, with Kaitlyn and her friends looking forward to the thrill of the drop. However, as they ascended, a sudden, ominous jolt shattered the atmosphere of excitement. The whipping sound of snapping cables, like harbingers of doom, filled the air. Cables cascaded around them, a metallic storm ensnaring their bodies. Only 20 feet off the ground, and yet they were plunged into a maelstrom of fear and confusion. As the ride continued its relentless climb, Kaitlyn and her friends were trapped in a battle between life and death. Imagine the desperation, screaming for the ride to stop, the primal fear of not knowing if you'll ever see your loved ones again. The fear of pain you know that you are going to endure. It's a moment where time stands still, each second stretching into an eternity of dread. As the ride ascended amidst screams for help, the ride operator, faced with a dire situation, hesitated. Instead of immediately hitting the stop button, a decision that could have halted the tragedy in its tracks, she reached for her phone in a panic. Desperate for guidance, she called the organizers, asking what she should do in such an unprecedented crisis. This crucial delay, this moment of indecision, allowed the ride to continue its ascent to the peak. By the time she finally pressed the stop button, it was tragically too late. Now put yourself in Kaitlyn's shoes, perched at the apex of this giant ride, knowing the plunge is imminent. But unlike the exhilarating drop you anticipate on such rides, Kaitlyn and her friends faced a descent into real horror. Cables binding her, injuries manifesting with every second, the smell of burning flesh intertwining with her fear, the terror of not just falling, but of not knowing if this fall might be her last. It's a scenario that chills to the bone, a stark reminder of how quickly joy can turn to despair. As the ride ground to a halt, the extent of Kaitlyn's ordeal became chillingly apparent. She was drenched in blood. Her friends, too, bore the marks of the catastrophe, their appearances marred by injury and shock. A crowd of concerned onlookers and park staff quickly formed around them, each person propelled by a desperate urge to offer assistance. The air was heavy with panic and a sharp scent of fear as they awaited the arrival of the ambulance. The most heart-wrenching revelation was yet to come. Both of Kaitlyn's feet had been savagely torn off by the ride's merciless machinery. This stark, gruesome reality sent waves of horror through the crowd. Whispers of disbelief mingled with the urgent shouts of first responders, creating a cacophony of despair and action. Her shoes, with her feet still inside, were found meters away. Paramedics worked swiftly, applying tourniquets to stem the bleeding and administering pain relief to help ease her unimaginable suffering. The crowd watched in somber silence, a shared feeling of helplessness pervading the air. As Kaitlyn was carefully loaded onto the stretcher, her injured friends, still in shock, were attended to and were also taken to hospital. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur for Kaitlyn. Through the haze of pain and medication, she clung to the voices of the paramedics, their steady presence a small comfort during her trauma. At the hospital, doctors and nurses moved quickly. As her family arrived, tears and words of comfort mingled with the clinical sounds of the emergency room. She was then flown to Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, where doctors were able to reattach her right foot. Unfortunately, her left leg had to be amputated just below her knee. In the days that followed, Kaitlyn faced the reality of her life-changing injuries. Surgeries and rehabilitation sessions became her new normal. The support of her friends, family, and the community was a beacon of light in her darkest moments. The last few years after this incident have been a waiting game to see if Kaitlyn's body would accept her replanted foot and whether it would regain motor and sensory function. Thankfully, today is said to be fully functional. Now, I know some of you will be extremely angry about why this happened, and if it were your loved one, you would want justice. Please let us all know your feelings regarding the following. The crux of this terrible event lies in two critical areas: maintenance and training, specifically concerning the cables that failed and resulted in injuries to Kaitlyn. Despite the amusement park's denial of any wrongdoing in their court responses, a reaction that might not come as a surprise, it's clear that the maintenance of the ride's cables was grossly neglected. The manufacturer of the ride, Intamin, had provided Six Flags with a detailed manual for the ride's upkeep. This guide expressly advised ride inspectors to meticulously examine the cables every 6 months using a cotton rag, a procedure designed to identify any signs of wear or fraying. However, revelations from a worker's deposition pointed to a stark deviation from these guidelines. The staff responsible for inspections admitted that the prescribed method of checking the cables was never followed. Instead, driven by a fear of the cables slipping, they resorted to an unconventional method: applying cornstarch to the cables to supposedly improve grip. The park received a $1,000 fine. Yes, you heard it right. Only a $1,000 fine. The issue didn't stop at maintenance, training, or the lack thereof, played a significant role in the tragedy. When the ride operator, who was 18 at the time of the incident, was alerted by the screams of passengers just seconds into the ride, their response was not to immediately engage the emergency stop. Rather, they chose to call for assistance while the ride continued its ascent. By the time the emergency stop was activated, the ride had already begun its free fall. Had the ride operator been adequately trained to react promptly to the passengers' distress by hitting the emergency stop right away, this disaster could have been averted. In the aftermath of a heart-wrenching ordeal, a settlement was reached between Kaitlyn Lassiter and the Six Flags Corporation. While the exact terms remain veiled in secrecy, it's understood that Kaitlyn was granted a settlement substantial enough to secure her future. Yet, no amount of compensation can erase the deep scars left by the Superman Tower of Power accident.
How has it affected you?
In every way possible. This accident has affected my life dramatically. I was in bed for 10 months, and I was a 13-year-old girl coming into I was becoming a teenager, and that was taken away from me. My whole 8th grade year was taken away from me.
Our hearts ache for Kaitlyn, her family, and of course her friends who also went through a terrible ordeal of their own. I do feel sorry for the ride operator, as she has to live with this for the rest of her life. If you appreciate the effort I put into retelling this true event story, then I know you'll enjoy the stories featured on the end screen. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, as I'm trying to grow this channel. Until next time, bye for now.